Hi, I'm Lori Wildenberg, and I'm going to be talking with you today about identifying toxic interpretations of trigger events. And just as a little background, I'm a licensed parent and family educator. I'm also an author of 6 books, and my most recent book is Messy Hope: Help Your Child Overcome Anxiety, Depression, or Suicidal Ideation. And wow, this is such an important topic. Being able to identify those toxic interpretation of various trigger events. If you are a person that likes to take notes, would you please write RISE, the word rise, down the left side of your paper and leave a little space between because we're going to cover 4 different points about identifying toxic interpretations of trigger events. So, a toxic or a negative interpretation of an event that has triggered an emotional response in you, is what we are going to be discussing. So, those emotional responses to a trigger, they're bigger than they need to be, right? They make us feel sick to our stomach. They make our heart pounding out of our chest. It's a bigger emotional response. Sweaty hands, fainting could be an emotional reaction to a severe emotional reaction to a trigger event. And what we need to do is back ourselves up a little bit as we're starting to notice a little bit of how our body is beginning to feel when we enter into a situation that can trigger us. We can be triggered through things that make us angry, things that make us fearful, or things that make us sad. We are also triggered by various emotional things, um, just those emotional needs that everyone has, that we all have. We can be triggered by these, and we can start to respond to these things in a negative way if we aren't careful. Um, Basic needs that we can really feel like, wow, I was really hurt by this. Basic needs like acceptance or not being accepted or rejected. Okay, that's one. And that goes along with belonging as well. Also, our security, our safety. We can be fearful in certain situations, maybe a fear of heights. I have a fear of heights. These are things that can trigger events as well. Safety, respect. If respect is important to all people, but if it's one of your like really big ones, you can really be triggered to have an emotional response, a big emotional response to being disrespected or perceiving that you were disrespected. That could even be somebody blowing past you on the highway and, you know, cutting you off. And we could interpret that as, that, that driver was an idiot, um, or they thought that I was going too slow, or something along those lines, where we are looking for an answer and we are triggered. Our response is triggered. We A negative response to being disrespected on the road could be road rage. All right. So those are some things that are potential triggers. So we also want to just recognize that, with the letter R, recognize that things that trigger us are emotional needs and past experience. There can be some past experiences that really can affect present and future responses. So, for instance, a past experience, let's say that you have experienced perhaps abuse or abandonment. So, any sort of rejection from a past experience is going to trigger a big response in a person to that situation. So, those are some things for us to be paying attention to. what are past experiences that have been traumatic, maybe have been repeated over time, or have been one big traumatic thing that cause some emotional angst in us, and then cause us to respond in a way that perhaps isn't helpful, that gives us a negative response to that situation because we are interpreting something according to what has happened before or how we have felt before. So, repeated experiences can really be a place where emotional triggers in a negative way can happen. We generalize a situation and think that each situation is going to be the same, when perhaps each situation is maybe its own and it's different. Another thing for us to watch out for is the way we interpret that particular situation. So if we have felt rejected and we interpret it like he doesn't love me, all right? Um he didn't ask me out on this date. He doesn't love me. He doesn't care about me, as opposed to thinking, well, perhaps we're not going out because he's busy, right? There can be other reasons, but our negative interpretation of a trigger event being the trigger could be rejection, we are going to interpret it in a way that reflects back on us and also connects to an emotional need, like in this instance, a need to belong. So we really want to pay attention to what our interpretation is, because following our interpretation of what's going on is our self-talk. Our self-talk could be, I am not worthy of having love. So our thoughts move to, I'm rejected, he hates me, I'm not worthy. So, what we need to do after we recognize that these are toxic interpretations of singular events, if we can look at each event as its own rather than piled up one on top of each other, it's going to be better for us. And if we can evaluate our response, and as we evaluate, so the letter E, evaluate, R, rooted and repeated, the letter I, interpretation, the letter S, our self talk, the things that we say to ourselves about the situation, and the letter E, evaluate. If we can go back and evaluate the situation for what has actually happened, asking questions rather than assuming the worst. Is this a rejection? How are you feeling? Is something else going on? Right? Ask the question. And before asking the question, assume the best. And if we can start training our brains to ask questions when we feel like, oh my gosh, I am not being loved, I'm being rejected. If we can start asking questions when we're noticing an emotional need is not being met, or we're remembering a past experience that this seems similar to, start by asking some questions and assuming the best. I'm Lori Wildenberg, and I hope this little class has been helpful to you.